My name is Robert Boynton. I'm the director of the Literary Reportage Concentration here at the Arthur L. Carter Journalism Institute at New York University. Welcome to the second in our audio reportage series. We're very lucky tonight to have Rob Rosenthal. The legendary Rob Rosenthal of Transom and HowSound and many other things. And also he'll be talking with Anna Sale. Of her wonderful podcast, Death, Sex, and Money. And please join us again on April 14th, the third and the last of our audio reportage series, where we're going to be discussing the podcast Pitch with Whitney Jones and Alex Kappelman. So please come on April 14th to that. So with that, take it away, Robert.
Right. Thank you very much for having us here, Rob.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. I don't know if you noticed, but Rob and I are wearing the same clothes. It's like old teacher, white teacher clothes. Yeah, it's awesome. I actually called him up earlier and said, Rob, are you going to wear the blue button down? And I'll wear mine too. And so that's why we're dressed alike tonight. So, but thank you very much for having us here. I'm really appreciative. And I just have a quick question for you. Your book, The New Journalism, that was published when? If this was like The Daily Show, what I would do right now is I would hold up the book and there would be a close-up of the book. I just wanted to let you guys know that the book that he edited, The New Journalism, is insanely valuable. Even though what it is interviews with long-form journalists about their craft and how they do their work. And it's all print journalists, but it doesn't matter. If you're into radio, you should be reading this book, even though it's 10 years old. I can't recommend it enough. So, and thanks again for having us here. I also need to make sure to thank the sound guys. Thank you, sound guys. Much appreciated. So I'm Rob, and I host a podcast called HowSound, which is the backstory to great radio storytelling. That's the sort of subtitle or the moniker or whatever that's called. What is that called when you have a little thing underneath there? The tagline for the piece, for the show. And it comes from PRX and from Transom. And just a quick mention of what those two things are. PRX is a website. It's prx.org. And it's basically, it's like 18 million things these days. But it started off as like an online marketplace for radio producers to sell stories to radio stations. It basically was a shortcut to radio stations. It was always very hard for independent producers to get to radio stations and get producers, public program directors to buy pieces, and PRX was a shortcut. But now PRX produces content, it's a network, it's just an amazing thing. So if you need more listening in your life, I highly recommend going to PRX, and if you're a producer, it's a great place for you to put up your work and hopefully people will hear it and buy it and air it on their radio stations. And then Transom, the co-producer of HowSound, it's a website, transom.org. It started in 2000, and it's really the place to go to learn how to do audio storytelling. How many other places are there to learn how to do audio storytelling online? I don't know, but this is the one. And so Transom also offers workshops in audio storytelling. I teach those workshops. They're 2-month workshops on Cape Cod, and we do traveling workshops around the country, and that's Transom and PRX for you. I'm going to talk a little bit about, we're going to learn who Anna is in a little bit, but I just want to say to you that what I said to you over there in front of this group, I am so honored to be able to talk to you. Do you know that you can't swing a microphone without hear someone talking about your podcast, Death, Sex, and Money?
That's very graphic.
Yes. I used to say you can't swing a dead cat, but I thought it's a radio audience, so you can't swing a microphone.
Yeah. Thank you.
You know.
That means a lot.
And you as an interviewer, you are stellar. You are top-notch. You're just great. And so we're going to talk about interviewing tonight. So I'm going to interview you about interviewing. But do you know these things about yourself, that there is buzz?
Thanks. It's always nice to hear it. People don't buzz to me about me very much. So it's nice. Thank you.
It's really great that you're doing this.
Thank you.
So I want to play a clip from Death, Sex, and Money, the podcast that she hosts, just so you get a sense of it and we can sort of set the stage for the conversation tonight. WNYC, which is the radio station that sort of hosts Death, Sex, and Money, they describe it as a podcast about the big questions and hard choices that are often left out of polite conversation. And as if to prove that point, a recent episode of the program tackled infidelity, and it was called Cheating Happens, and here's the opening few minutes.
It was nothing that he ever tried to hide from me, but honestly, I had just never looked down at his hand. And one day I did, and it was just like, oh.
This is Death, Sex, and Money.
Oh, I'm sorry. Were you speaking to me or sleeping with someone else?
The show from WNYC about the things we think about a lot.
Anyway, the word is carries around a lot of cash.
And need to talk about more.
Live for nothing, or die for something.
I'm Anna Sale. Having an affair seems like such a big decision. Of course, it's really a series of small choices.
Once it actually finally happened and we started making out, I said, fuck. And he was like, what? And I was like, I hoped you were going to be so bad at this.
You're going to hear a lot of cheating stories in this episode. I'm going to start with one. Allie in Massachusetts met the guy she called her married boyfriend through work. They hit it off and started emailing and texting jokes to each other. He lived in another town, so they'd only see each other occasionally. Each time, she felt pulled further in. She was 29, single, and had never felt this way about someone, even though she knew he had a wife, a 2-year-old, and an infant at home.
I would say there was probably a 2-week span of battling in my head because my dad cheated on my mom, so I was so anti, no, you know what? If you choose to be with that person, then you be with that person, and if you're not happy, you leave, and that's just how it is. But that's not really how it is. So
how is it? What were you thinking about?
I think it became more painful to not do it, and to just test the waters and say, maybe this is the only guy that I'll ever be in love with. And for me to deny myself that would be terrible.
You felt a very deep connection to this guy.
Oh, yeah. He really become my best friend. And there was no denying that what we had was quasi-real.
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 You never had any illusions that it was going to be a long-term thing, but it felt right in that moment.
No, I had lots of illusions that this would that this would be for the long term. And there were a couple times where we actually talked about it. And I said, listen, I want us to be something. And he kind of said, I'm right there with you. It was an illusion that we both kind of built for each other.
This guy was not just married, he was married with 2 little kids.
Yeah.
When did you talk about that?
It was always a little bit present. There were certain times when he would go out and talk to his wife on the phone because,
He would leave a room where you were to go call his wife.
Oh, yeah. He'd go outside and smoke a cigarette because he was a smoker. So.
And what would you do while he was making those calls?
Play on my phone, watch TV, and every once in a while you reflect on it, but, and you feel bad. We both felt bad. It wasn't something that we were like, oh, this is really fun. We're having a blast. It was like, wow, what if life could be like without this,
What if life could be without this?
Like without his wife and kids, if it could just be us, would that even work? That would be something that I would always question in my head.
Allie told me their affair ended after about a year. By then, she says she felt like it was all about sex, and that's not what she wanted. As far as she knows, his wife never found out, and she hopes it stays that way. This was one of the stories you sent in when I asked about cheating. I heard from a lot of you.
I started having an affair about 2 weeks into the marriage, which makes me sound like the most horrible person in the world.
It is one of the most isolating and lonely experiences.
This is the only way that I find comfort.
Actually, don't feel a lot of guilt about it.
Don't do it. Just don't do it. It's a terrible idea.
I heard stories of people who cheated and were cheated on.
What has he got that I don't have?
Dating and married.
I had taken my wedding band off, and I left it in his cubby at work.
Almost all the stories were from straight people. Just a few lesbians wrote in. No gay men on this one. Some of you are right in the middle of it.
The person I am involved with is definitely cheating. He's still married. I'm not.
I feel like a shithole of a man, even as I type this message, wrote a husband whose wife doesn't know about his current cheating. I love both men deeply, wrote a married woman who reconnected with a college love. She added, is it right to have an affair? No, but I don't feel bad about what I'm doing.
I had been wanting to break up with him, and so I cheated on him, and I had to break up with him afterwards. It's not the best thing to do as a human being, but I'm really happy. I don't think I would be this happy without doing it.
Others of you wrote in with some perspective, well after the initial crisis.
We decided to write down all the events that had taken place that we were disappointed in ourselves with, and read it together as a couple, and then lit it on fire. And since that moment, it has been incredible.
All right, that's an excerpt from Death, Sex, and Money, a recent episode called Cheating Happens. What brand of pixie dust do you use to spread over to the people you're interviewing to get them to speak so freely and openly about that subject matter?
Well, the thing that I love about this episode is, all the tape that you heard, other than Allie at the top. I was there with Allie. We did an interview, but all that other tape, people sent via voice memo from their iPhones or from their smartphones. So I think what they're responding to, and it's something I'm proud of, is they're responding to this podcast feeling like a safe space to kind of let this stuff off your chest. And you hear, we heard a lot about the sense of isolation that people felt if they were a cheater or had been cheated on, because it's either humiliating or it's very shameful. And so our inbox was just full of these voice memos that then we could edit and stitch together and kind of give the episode this force of the thesis is basically it happens. Like, this is something something very painful and difficult that a lot of us have navigated, and we haven't talked about it.
Is that the intent of the show, to make a safe place to have these conversations?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's safe-ish. I still consider myself a journalist, so it's not like come and you won't have your assumptions challenged, or you won't be held accountable, or that sort of thing. But definitely, I try to, my first objective when I start an interview is to create that sense of I'm listening deeply to you. And so I think that often feels like, okay, well, I feel safe to sort of say how I feel.
What else do you do? So it's listening deeply, but what else? There's a room full. I'm guessing this is a room full of radio producers or people who would like to be radio producers, right? Don't we all do interviews? Don't we all go in and talk to people about things that they're usually not talking about because we're there with a microphone? I don't know that all of us get this tape. So regardless of the type of story that we produce or the beat that we work on, I guess what I'm wondering is, what do you do in addition to listening deeply to help people feel comfortable to tell you these things?
Yeah, well, I think my background is reporting, and political reporting was most recently. And I've actually been thinking about this a lot. Like, my 2012 and 2013, I was covering campaigns, and I was interviewing a lot of voters. And so basically my job was to stop people on the street and say, hey, I'm covering a campaign, tell me your hopes and fears and what you're afraid of and what you hope for in the future. And so, while they're trying to walk into the store or whatever. So it was a real exercise in having to just really quickly establish buy-in with someone. So I do this when we sit down for a Death, Sex, and Money interview. It's, you might have heard of the show. If you haven't heard of the show, this is what we explore. The show is about the transitions in life. It's about hard moments that often don't get talked about. It's all on tape. So, if there's a place where we tread that I ask a question that's too personal, you don't have to answer it. And so sort of established those ground rules for a Death, Sex, and Money interview. And I think that I learned that from saying to, a suspicious rural voter who's been interviewed 600 times by reporters because they live in rural Ohio, by saying, like, I don't want to talk about the candidates. I don't want to talk about the poll. I don't want to quiz you on policy issues. I want to know what's going on in your life and what's making you feel anxious, and what these two guys who are running for president, like, how you feel about them. But it's not a quiz. It's not a test. And I think that experience of kind of just being really clear with what your objective is goes a long way to make people feel comfortable.
Yeah. I think Allie said this, but if Allie didn't, I know, having listened to 8 million of your podcasts, although there's only how many episodes?
I think we're like 26 or 27.
Okay, 8 million's
week.
close.
Yeah.
Many people will say, I haven't even told my friends this.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm flogging a dead horse by asking this question again, but if they're not telling their friends, right, which presumably would be a safe place, yet they're coming to you to talk to you so that the general public can hear it, my mind's going still with this.
Yeah, this episode in particular, I was really stunned by that. And we did, in this episode, because it's like I think I go on and say, sourcing in this episode, we used first names, we changed some names, and so we were really clear with the people we interviewed that how their tape was going to be used and how, what personal details we would leave out so they or their partners couldn't be identified. But I don't really know what's happening. I think it's the show started with, one of the first episodes was me telling a story of, like, not knowing what the hell I was doing in my love life and being completely, like, freaked out about being divorced and in my early 30s and not knowing if this partner was the one for me and would I ever have kids and just needing help. And so I think that by creating this expectation that, like, nobody has the answers, you're not going to come and, be judged for not, for any moment of uncertainty. I think that created a space where listeners are responding to that idea and saying, like, this is the thing that I have struggled with. And it's not just cheating we get emails about, it's like all sorts of things. We got a slew of emails after this episode came out of different people just confessing cheating by hiding their finances from their partner, and had gotten into really difficult problems that they haven't told their bosses and their partners about. And so I think it's about just creating that space. Like, these are hard things, and I think that's what I wanted to do with the podcast. That's why I wanted to start it, because I felt a little adrift and wanted to not feel like I was alone in my adriftness.
Would you answer these questions? The questions you ask people?
To an extent.
Because I could ask them if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I also feel very, I feel protective of the people in my life. Like, when you're talking about relationships, it's not just me who's involved. And so, like, to the extent that I've talked about my relationship on the show, I tell Arthur how he's being described or what tape I'm using, and is it okay if I say
Arthur?
this? Arthur is my fiance, said boyfriend who I was freaked out about when I did the episode where Senator Alan Simpson, former senator of Wyoming, and his wife intervened to get us back together. It really happened. I was like, now I have to make a radio story out of this. Oh my God. Yeah.
Allie, who we heard the most from, she was in the room with you. Mm-hmm. Do you do interviews where people aren't in the room with you? Do you do tape syncs and things like that, or ISDNs? Mm-hmm. Yeah. How is that different?
It has advantages and disadvantages. Because my background is reporting, when you go out and you're collecting tape from people, the first thing you learn is not to step over your tape, so not to interrupt. And that's a great thing to learn when you're trying to collect like a sweet 20-second soundbite for a radio feature. When you're hosting a show, it's really not the best thing to do, because there'll be like Pro Tools sessions where it'll be like guess, and I'll be like, but what about, and then it'll be, because I don't interrupt. So I'm trying to learn how to interrupt and to make my tape more of a conversation. And I'm much more apt to do that when it's ISDN or tape sync, because then if I'm talking over the tape, it's not on their tape, so we can edit around it if it didn't work out. If we're in the same room, it just restricts your ability to edit. But the advantage of being in the same room together is you can nod, you can lean in, you can establish a sort of rapport that over the phone or over a line, you have to do that with just vocal cues. And I think that I laugh louder at jokes if we're not in the same space, because I'm like, I'm right here with you, or like, so to make sure they know that they're not talking to just sort of this, disembodied recorder. It's so that there are advantages and disadvantages to both, I think.
For folks who don't know, an ISDN line is just a fancy special connection between one studio and another, so it sounds like you're both in the same studio, even though you're cities apart. Where did you learn to interview?
I came up through public radio newsrooms. I started at West Virginia Public Radio, where I'm from, which was a great place to learn because I had fantastic editors and an entire state that no one else was doing radio except for my 5 or 6 colleagues. And I got to cover whatever. I got to cover news, I got to cover politics, I got to cover old bluegrass musicians. And so that...
Is there any other kind?
Yes. But the old ones are the best interviews. So it was just learning. It was like kind of being thrown into a space that you just could explore, and learning how to interview. I guess I've been doing this a long time. So I've been reporting since 2005, so 10 years. And you just sort of learn. You learn how to make someone, I think political reporting is a really good skill for making people feel. If you have to learn how to get voters to open up, they are so skeptical about reporters, and particularly in swing states, because that's how we cover campaigns now. We just go to 10 or places, and people are interviewed 1 million times. But if you can figure out that way in, like no, you're like, your story matters. Like you actually hold the fate of this country in your hands as a voter in Ohio, and like you should feel really empowered about that. Tell me your story. Like that is a way that I think my interviewing improved a lot by doing that.
So what is it you're saying then to Allie and others for this show and others off mic to make them feel that?
So Allie, for example, she sent in an email describing, or I think she sent in a voice memo. So she'd already gone to a certain point in the story that she was kind of narrated to us. So then we wrote back and we said, we'd like to actually talk to you on tape. Could we set up an interview? And so I knew that there was a lot she was willing to confess without prodding. And so then it was, okay, like what is this experience of being the third party, the one who's not in a committed relationship, but knowing full well that your partner, the person you're with, is, like, what are the ethics around that? And I also thought it was really interesting that her story that, she had been the child of parents had gone through this, and she had seen her father cheat on her mom. And so she knew what I was interested in, and she wanted to talk about it. I think it was like, this was a profound experience in her life that she talked to a very small circle of friends with, and I think it felt good to talk about.
Who do you look up to as an interviewer?
Terry Gross.
She has no last name.
Yeah.
Yes.
The Terry. She's my hero, and I have always loved her, and I think that she continues to set the bar. And I think, like, when I was piloting, so we piloted Death, Sex, and Money starting in December of 2013, so the month after the mayoral race. I got off the politics beat and started playing around. And so I was listening a lot to Fresh Air, and I was listening a lot to WTF. And I was kind of trying to figure out that space in between of allowing yourself to make references to where you deeply understand something because it hits something you've gone through in your own life. And Mark Maron does that. And it's part of his act, and it's sort of, I try not to do it quite as much as he does. I think that's but like that, hit that space in between the two of them. But they both, what they share is, you listen to a full episode and you can't believe that they were able to open up their guest in the ways that they did, and they do it in different ways. So I think listening to them both really informed the show.
Do you steal from anybody?
Sure. First of all, I steal from my editor all the time, Emily Botine. Like I feel like she makes this show tremendously better than it would be if she were not in the room. She just has like really, really good ears and really, really precise notes. And it's taught me a lot about like the value of having a radio editor who like gets the medium, because your work is just improved 100-fold.
Yeah, but that's a colleague. I'm talking about outright theft.
Outright theft, sure. Let's see. Outright theft. I mean, you think about that. Like you think like Death, Sex, and Money is, we do interviews with people who are not famous, and so who aren't sort of in the, you can't Google search them and see all the interviews they've done. But we also do interviews with people who've done a million, zillion, interviews. And in those cases, like when I interviewed Jane Fonda, it was, okay, this woman has been visible in American life since, for decades and decades and decades. Her entire life has been chronicled. What are the places where she has, gone up to a certain point, and under what conditions did that happen? And how can I get her there based on what that person did, and then take it a little further? And so I think in that case, it was sort of like I knew she would respond to the idea of me being a fellow woman moving through the world and trying to figure out, choices of balancing relationships and your own ambitions and that sort of thing. So that's not like stealing, but it's definitely like surveying the landscape of what's been done before and trying to take the best parts of what they did and then taking it a little further.
Right, moving the story forward.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. The first episode that I heard of Death, Sex, and Money was I love you, but there's this money thing. And I was immediately smitten by the program, and I was smitten for two reasons. One is the people that she was talking to were just telling her stuff that you just wouldn't fully expect. But more importantly than that, you were talking to, on that show in particular, regular people who hadn't written a book, people who hadn't done something that had gone viral, people who weren't in the news. It was just people living their lives and telling you about how they lived their lives. And it was so refreshing. And I thought maybe, this is going to be big. I thought maybe, I was like, oh my God, is this the new Studs Terkel?
Oh.
Hi, Anna. This is some information for your upcoming podcast on the topic of money in relationships.
I asked for your stories about love and money. You sent in a lot about bad decisions, practical fixes, and lingering questions.
I just sort of got out of a relationship that was perfect and wonderful in every way I felt, and then when the idea of a prenup came, our relationship just fell apart.
Tiffany Harris is 28. She lives in D.C. Her message started with a simple plea. Can we talk about prenups?
I was engaged to this guy, a really wonderful guy. We met while we were living and working in Israel, and we were talking about the wedding and planning and setting a date, looking at rings. I bought a dress, and then he sent me a Facebook message that said something like, oh, and I'm sending you this document, that my parents want, and I'm going to need you to sign it before we get married. I just said something like, oh, this is getting like less and less romantic by the day.
Why did he want you to sign a prenup?
Well, first he presented it as something that his parents wanted, and then it became something that he wanted, sign it or we have to break up.
How long were you together?
About 3 years.
And how would you describe, what was the impasse about a prenup?
He's someone who's supported almost 100% by his parents, and I think what they say really dictates a lot of what he can do or what he feels like he can do. And I guess for me, I was thinking about it today, and I remember my mom's side of the family came from money, and when my grandfather died, there was inheritance that my family fought over, and I was only 5 at the time, but it was just disgusting. I'm 28 now, and I still haven't met my uncle because they're total enemies over this, and I was just really turned off by what I felt was a kind of obsession with money. But then again, in the end, I was ready to concede because I felt like, it's hard enough to meet someone just to have that connection. That's not something that comes along every day. It seemed really silly to sacrifice it over this. And if I love him and it's meant to be, then we wouldn't get divorced. And I was totally ready to concede. I just wanted a few things changed in the prenup, but it just ended like that.
Do you think, though, that the prenup prompted you to talk about things that would have quickly become issues in a marriage?
Yeah, maybe not quickly. I don't know if I kind of think that if we would have been together longer and married longer without all of that, we would have developed a stronger bond and better communication skills to get over those things.
So it sounds like you're mourning the relationship. You wish you still had it in your life.
I am. I'm very, very sad about that. And I really miss him too.
Do you have the kind of relationship with your parents where you talk to them about this?
No, I didn't really, because I didn't want my family to hate him.
Oh, you were protecting him.
Yeah, exactly. It's so embarrassing. I still haven't told a few people at my work because I'm just I'm so embarrassed. And you tell people you're getting married and then it's they're asking about it and you're just yeah, it's still happening. Yeah. I mean, I haven't taken it that far, but yeah, so.
And you're 27?
I'm 20. I just turned 28.
28 is a fantastic year.
Is it really?
Yeah, I loved being 28. Yeah.
I'm more partial to 22. I don't know. Hopefully it's knowledge instead of scarification or something that's gonna make me unstable and untrusting in my next relationship. Sometimes I feel this new wisdom is good, and sometimes I'm oh, it just makes me bitter, or hopefully not.
So that's Tiffany Harris talking about prenups in the episode I Love You, But There's This Money Thing. Do you feel like a therapist?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes. I'm completely unlicensed and unqualified to be a therapist, but I do, I think it's such a privilege that people, Tiffany's still working through something there. She's trying to figure out if it's okay that they broke up, and what a privilege that she's letting us capture that moment, because that moment is when, in my life, when you don't know whether what's right or wrong, or whether something's good that happened, or that's, to just hear that somebody else voice that is comforting.
I feel like sometimes interviewing, not for HowSound, but for projects that I work on the side, it feels like radiotherapy sometimes. Because I think part of our job is to try to get the factual truth, but I also think that it's important to get the emotional truth. And once you start walking down that path, it starts to feel like they should be lying on a couch and there should be a microphone suspended above them, and I just get to sit and make notes. That's how it feels. Does that feel that way to you sometimes? I'm obviously making it somewhat cartoonish, but do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and it is interesting, and I'm still figuring this out. The cheating episode, that was prompted by an interview with Dan Savage, and we got all this listener email after we'd had Dan Savage on the phone, or on the show, and Dan Savage always knows what to say when somebody has a question or uncertainty. Like, he is just clear on what his rules are and what the ethics are around how to have a healthy and honest relationship. I couldn't write that down in the tracking for the cheating episode, and so it was this like. It's like, does Death, Sex, and Money need to have a point of view about how we think life it should work and how your lives should work? And because I don't have it yet. So if that's what people are looking for when they listen. And that's what's, I think, I'm just like, for me, it's just this like curiosity of like, how are you making this work? What's it look like in your life? And so when you ask those deep questions, certainly it's therapy, because we don't ask ourselves those questions much, like where we're stitching together, what happened when we were kids and what we learned from our parents and what we're going through, in this moment. So, that's the best part of therapy. And it also makes for really good radio,
Yeah, I don't think that should come from you. I want it to come from the people you're talking to. Yeah. So I'm glad you've made that decision. Yeah. Thank you for that. I mentioned Studs Terkel earlier, and I heard you go, oh.
Yeah, that's a nice compliment. I hope people tweeted that. That is like high praise. I mean, because...
Yeah, but couldn't he have... I don't know if you guys know Studs. If you know any oral historian, you know Studs Terkel. Because name another oral historian, like right now. Name one. I don't think you can. But Studs interviewed America about how they lived their lives, and that's what you're doing.
Well, and the other thing that he did was he treated all of his subjects with the utmost. He gave them dignity by the way he listened, and and he was like, and that is, I think, one of the things that I strive for is by, certainly I can disagree with people's life choices, but to make clear that I am coming to them with the perspective that they have dignity and I want to hear about their lives. Like that is what he did. Yeah, working is like on the shelf in a prominent place.
Earmarked?
Yeah. Being from West Virginia, like that's stuff. That's important.
Good. At some point, I don't know when, we're going to start handing a microphone out to you guys and passing that through the audience. So be thinking about your questions. How do you prepare for an interview? What do you do?
Let's see. If it's someone who's done a lot of interviews, it's sort of one set of prep responsibilities, which is like get a sense of what they've talked about. I listen to podcasts that they've been on. I will look at videos. I will consume their work, and what I take into a studio is a timeline of their life. So sort of the dates of when they were born, when they moved from their childhood home to the other city, like who they married, when they divorced, when they started acting, that sort of thing.
You have that already.
I have that, in the studio, because I like...
Even with people who aren't famous?
Even with people who aren't famous, because I really think it's useful in grounding an interview, and it's useful for me to sort of figure out, like, so this happened when you were 32, and you had been married for 10 years, and your career all of a sudden just collapsed. Like, that is a different story than if you're 22. And so it helps me to sort of think about where they were in life and what they might have been, what the stakes were. So I'll have that. And then I will have a list of questions, but I don't often look at them in the interview. It's sort of, I go in, we will have like a prep meeting the half hour before the interview starts, and we nail down all the questions, and it's all written down. But mostly what I kind of pay attention to is just the narrative arc, like where are we beginning, where are we ending, where do we think the mid-show break might come in, because you want that to be at a pivot point and also a point of, a promise of, deeper stuff, so people will keep listening. And
you're manipulating us. Is that what you're saying?
I'm just trying to make a really good show. And so that's what we take in. And a prep for someone who's not famous, and when there's not much in the public record about them, I mean, there's a rare person who you can't find their LinkedIn profile or whatever. But that's just figuring out, I have a producer, Katie Bishop, who works with me, and so she does all the pre-interviews for people that we talk to ahead of time, so there's still that element of surprise when we're talking, when the guest and I are talking.
I think it's really interesting that you have, that the primary document for you isn't your questions necessarily. It's the plot points of their life.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's really, I don't know when we started doing that, but I mean, we started doing it pretty early on because it just helps me. We had some older guests, like in the first, couple of months of the show. Like I thought maybe Death, Sex, and Money is just going to be Anna interviews people in their 80s. Because they have really they give good interview. But so it was like, okay, well, where are they now and what all happened? And so that was, I think, where it started from, and it's been really useful.
Are you nervous when you interview people?
I'm not.
What?
I know. I like feel like, and that's what's really cool about getting to make this show is I feel really in flow with, like, my skill as a reporter was always getting the good tape from, it was just, that was my skill. It wasn't, I really tried to be like a badass investigative reporter and, admired all my colleagues who were whizzes with FOIAs and, with Freedom of Information requests. But like so I feel really in flow with just what I'm good at. I don't really get nervous ahead of time, and people have mentioned that, like that with famous people, like, that there can be like a fawning element with people who are super famous. But I think for me, it's just like, I just am like so curious about like Ellen Burstyn or Jane Fonda, like, what has it been like to live their lives? And so that's like the emotion that I feel is just like, we got to get all this out because this is incredible that you have had this life.
Your curiosity quashes the nervousness. That's what
Usually.
It sounds like.
Yeah, usually. Yeah. It's also, I should say, Death, Sex, and Money is recorded, and that is a huge relief. I sit in for talk shows for Brian Lehrer or for Leonard Lopate occasionally at WNYC, and I definitely, secret, like 10 minutes before I go on the air, both of those, for either of those shows, I will go into the women's bathroom and I'll like give myself a little pep talk. Be Anna, it's okay, you don't have to be Brian, you don't have to be Leonard. And I do get nervous about that because that's like hitting posts, that's everyone can hear if you like took that wrong turn with the interview and, your 12-minute interview just got, bogged down with a stupid question. The caller who just flew off the handle and made the anti-Semitic remark, which has happened on the air, and I had to figure out how to deal with that. But that I do get nervous because that's, performance in the moment, and I can perfect things in polish when you're dealing with tape.
I'm losing weight as we talk. I am so nervous. I need to figure out. I need to know how to not be nervous because I'm nervous every single time I interview someone. I feel like there's like a little bit of nerve. You should feel my hands. They are like. I feel like some
crowd?
Are
you more nervous?
Well,
when
there's that
crowd?
too. I'm trying to ignore them.
Yeah.
Because in radio we don't get to see our audience, but here, So I feel like there's some value in a little bit of nervousness because it means I'm paying attention, right? But then there's like, it can go too far and you're just like, do you ever second guess yourself? Like, can you be human just for a second?
Oh, I do. I mean, the thing where I feel nervous in an interview is like, this like, we're wasting time. I have an hour with this person and we have spent 5 minutes on this stupid section that I know we're not going to use any of the tape, and like, get in there, Anna, and like and so that's like it's like, and I feel like, oh, my producers are like across the glass and they can see that I'm like, so it's that kind of like performance anxiety, but for me it's not, it doesn't feel like nerves. It's more like just, an intense, like just wanting to get the good tape. And if I feel like I'm missing a moment to break in or missing a moment for that follow-up question, or they had like an emotional break where you could see that they were opening up on something and then they shut down and I didn't get in to like take advantage of that opening, that doesn't sound like nerves, but that's what I'm thinking about in an interview.
You've talked about producers a couple of times. Are people talking in your ear and asking and suggesting the next question? And that's how does that work for someone who doesn't know how this works?
Sometimes, so it depends on the setting. If I'm in a studio, which most of our interviews recently have been me in a studio, I wear headphones and I'm alone in the studio, or I have the guest if it's an in-person interview, and then the interview is engineered, and it's who's an engineer, and then the producer Katie or Emily is in there, and so they listen, and like it's like Death, Sex, and Money is supposed to be a show where we ask like the hard questions, and like if someone mentions like that's when I ran out of money, Katie will be like, how much money do they have now? And I'm like, you don't have to ask this, like that's what I hear in my ear, and so I'm like, how am I gonna so she's yelling like the rude questions in my ear, and I'm trying to figure out the strategy to get there. Then when it's in person, I was telling somebody this today. We did an episode with a prisoner in Sing Sing, and that was all in person. I was sitting on the end of the table, he was sitting across from me at the corner, and Emily was recording him with a boom mic, and I was holding my own mic. And so there was no like giving me notes that he couldn't see. And you can't give notes when the guest can see you, because that makes it all feel very, that makes them feel unsafe. But Lawrence, he was in prison for killing a teenager when he was a teenager, and I asked a question about, if this teenager's family, the teenager who died, if this family is listening to this interview, what do you want to make sure they hear you say? And it's a very big question, a hard question, and he got very emotional. And Emily just, Lawrence is sort of looking away because he's starting to cry, and Emily's hand just kind of goes up like this. And she's just like, don't make a sound. And she kept it up. And then at a certain point, I said, it's okay. I understand. Don't, because he starts apologizing for crying, and I say, it's okay. And then, but it's a very quiet moment. And that was thanks to, a very subtle note from a producer.
Why don't we listen to that clip? I actually have that.
Thanks.
Ready?
If the family of the young man, the 15-year-old who died, hears this interview, what do you want to make sure they hear you say?
I would tell them that I'm sorry. I would say, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I would say it wasn't my intention to harm their son. I would say that's nothing I would ever want any parent or any family member to go through. I would say I wouldn't ask them to forgive me, because that's up to them. But I would just hope by saying sorry, they can have some sort of closure and know that it's just not something that I take lightly. Know that it's not something that I just did and I just want to get out of prison for some selfish reason. Know that I think about it and know that it's hurtful to me. And it's a blight on my life that I could never get back. And just wish them a good future, and I hope that they was able to have some type of happiness after what I did. Tough to say. Sorry.
It's okay.
I just want to say about that episode, I may have, talking about it in a tactical way, I think diminishes the power of that episode in Lawrence's story. he was convicted of murder when he had just turned 19, I think, when he was convicted. He's been in prison since. He's since become a father 3 times. He's married. He will be up for parole in a little over 2 years. And it's just like that episode of just hearing the story of a life when you make a terrible, terrible mistake, a tragic mistake, by firing a gun in a movie theater, and it kills an innocent bystander, a teenager. Like there's so much in that episode, and that he was willing to go there with me was just such a. I mean, again, felt like a privilege, and I met his wife, Renine, who came on the Brian Lehrer show with me and talked about what it is to be the mother to his 2 young kids while he's still serving time. And what that experience is like, but that's just one of my very, very favorite episodes. And you hear in that clip that it's about the biggest things in life, and the things that we cannot undo. And yeah, that's what I want to say about that episode.
I had a friend of mine once who said that if someone starts crying, you don't move the mic away, at least not at the beginning. I mean, after a while. But there's some point where the mic needs to go away. But at the beginning, you keep the mic there because if you move the mic away, they may think that they're ruining your recording. But by keeping the mic there, it actually suggests otherwise. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think I would keep my microphone there, and I would avert my eyes, because it's, particularly for a man, just what a vulnerable place when you're crying with a stranger.
I want to talk about how, I'm not sure I know what the words are, what I want to talk about, but I want to talk about how you are in the show. And you've already alluded to it, and maybe I should have started talking about it then when you alluded to it, but you alluded to it when you said, in the very first episode, or an early episode, I just laid it on the line. Here's the deal. This is what's going on in my life. And you felt like that contributed to this being a safe space. It's unusual for a reporter, a journalist, a show host, it seems to me, at least in general, for them to be putting themselves into a show that way. Stand by.
And you're 27?
I'm 20. I just turned 28.
28 is a fantastic year.
Is it really?
Yeah, I loved being 28. Yeah.
I'm more partial to like 22. I don't know. Hopefully it's like knowledge instead of like scarification or something that's going to like make me unstable and untrusting in my next relationship. Like sometimes I feel like this new wisdom is good, and sometimes I'm like, oh, it just makes me like bitter or hopefully not.
So she talks about how she likes being 28. We also hear her laugh. Aren't we supposed to be quiet when you interview someone? I'll just stop there. So talk to me about that.
Let's see. I think part of that was I felt a little maternal because of you heard the conversation up to that point, and that she was seriously feeling like she had lost this one chance at love and everlasting happiness because this prenup had blown up her relationship. So I think that was part of my motivation, and I actually did love being 28. But I think my presence as an interviewer that you hear is also because this is a podcast as opposed to radio. I think that's really key. I think that the relationship that podcast host, like with the money episode and with the cheating episode, it's important to point out that all of the people that we interviewed and all the stories we tell are our listeners. So we are this community, this club of people who have decided to think about these big questions together. I'm not just finding people and saying, what do you think about your joint checking account? It's someone who has like said that they kind of, or they're in the death, sex, and money kind of mindset. So I think, but podcasting, it feels like there is, the relationship with the audience is more intimate because they're choosing to press play to hear your show as opposed to running across you while they, are scanning the broadcast spectrum. You have that kind of, that sense of a community. And the laugh is just like, that is just what happens. It wasn't intentional. I think that's just like, I think it's what I do in real life. So it's what happens in interviews. Yeah, it's when I get nervous, when something is actually funny, when I'm just trying, it comes up a lot.
And it's a great laugh.
Thank you.
And we love that you laugh in this show.
Thank you.
But I always do the radio laugh.
Yeah. Yeah,
You know,
I know. I'm finding myself, sometimes when I do that and it's like, shoot, like that, like, like just like the most bare, like I'm like, pump up that volume so you can at least hear some interaction, but it's like, that just like doesn't, like what I try, it's like when I laugh, I'm trying to like, it's like, I think it's funny in the moment, and it's also giving the listener permission to smile in the subway when they're listening, or smile on the treadmill. It's like, that was funny, like that little moment. And so it's that cue of like, yeah, that was funny,
Here's another one.
Where did you meet your boyfriend?
We met on a motorcycle ride. I have a motorcycle. He has a motorcycle.
That is hot.
I would never say that.
Oh, I loved her. I can't remember her name off the top of my head. Do you remember her name?
I'm sorry,
I don't have the
I
script
don't have it in
front of
my
me.
notes.
I apologize.
But yes, she was awesome.
She's awesome, and we had talked about, that was in the context of, she was in this relationship with this boyfriend that she'd fallen in love with after being a grown woman, or a divorced woman with grown children, meets this guy at a motorcycle riding meetup. Like, it's just like, there are so many women across America who have that experience of the like late in life, love story, and they've just been missing from the ways we think about how our lives unfold. And that she is like this kind of proper woman who's trying not to get married so that, because of Medicaid rules, and then she rides a motorcycle. It's like, you're awesome,
Yes.
Yeah.
And
the choice to make that sound, I don't know why I did that. I think I didn't think I was going to use that tape, because it was just, the episode was about money, and I'm just in the booth and we're talking, and I'm like, so how did you meet your boyfriend? And then I was like, oh, that makes you like this whole other dimension to your character. So that then we used it. Yeah.
I don't know if it's because I was raised in New England and there's a little puritanical, like there's a punk rocker and a little Puritan that battle inside of me. And
interesting.
So, yeah. It's an
Let's
awesome,
talk more about that.
Yeah. No, I'm asking the questions. But I just couldn't say to someone, that is hot.
Yeah, you can't.
In an interview.
Well, you can't because you're a man. It would be creepy.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that that's something to think about. Like the interviewing techniques of a woman are so different than a man's.
Go.
Well, for example, like I find when straight dudes ask women about sex, I feel uncomfortable as a listener, whereas for me, it's like, oh, it's like the feminist / Mother Earth is kind of interested in how sex and relationships work. It's so I think it's not the creepiness factor is different for women. I mean, I could certainly be creepy if I, to see what, I mean, by pushing at a certain, like if you push beyond like what feels like where the person wants to go, that gets creepy no matter what the interviewer's gender. But I think that that's sex is something in particular, I think, where I've like, oh, like when you hear a male interviewer bring up sex when they're talking to another dude, it's like, oh, now I feel like I'm like listening in on like dude sex talk. But like if it's a man talking to a woman asking questions about sex, particularly if it's a straight guy and it's a straight woman, it's like, what's the dynamic? Yeah.
What about with money? Does that hold true for money?
Money, I find, let's see. I mean, I think money is definitely true, and it's like I didn't grow up struggling with money, and so that I think is what I bring to the show is like, there's things that I don't know, like I don't know what it is to not know if your family's gonna have enough money growing up. So my curiosity about that, I try to just kind of keep in check, like, is this becoming anthropological, and like, what's it like to, like how to talk to poor people where you're, treating them like humans and not like, Appalachian barefoot people being from West Virginia. I'm sensitive to that sense of oh, how do the poor people live? So that I think is what I think about when it comes to money. It's how am I wording these questions, and am I wording them in a way that respects their agency and the balance of circumstance versus their choices.
To go back to the Earth Mother thing, are you calling upon some inner...
I can't believe I said that.
Tweet that, right?
Earth Mother, what's your question about that?
You had said that when you were asking questions to people about their sex lives, I think you said especially other women.
Yeah.
But maybe it was in general, you call upon, when you're asking it, it's your inner Earth Mother.
Well, it's I think it's a little bit like what happens with female friends. You talk about sex, and that's in a ways, so it's, and I have a bunch of sisters. And so it's not so much like Earth Mother, like I'm somehow more knowing than anyone else, but it's kind of a, just digging in and going after the real stuff that women talk about when they're in the kitchen by themselves. Not that they're in the kitchen, but when I'm thinking I'm thinking in my family, growing up in my family, a certain, not my generation, but a certain generation, it was after dinner, the men, were in one room and the women were in the other room, and the conversation in the kitchen where the women were putting the dishes away was way more interesting. Yeah.
No doubt.
Yeah.
How about this? This sort of maybe gets at what we talked about earlier with you talking about your personal life.
So it's easy to be naive about the financial entanglements in love until you get burned, or when a breakup comes with a stack of paperwork. I'll never forget sitting at the dining room table with my soon-to-be ex-husband, going over bank statements. Our split was very sad, but amicable. And we were young, without kids, much money, or much debt, so we did the math ourselves. A lawyer told us to start by going back to the date we got married. So there we were, shuffling papers and scrolling back through statements to our wedding day. A day that had been about love and commitment and partnership for the future was now part of a financial calculation. So we added it up, what we'd saved and spent and built over 3.5 years, and on a desktop calculator, divided by 2. I was on my own again.
It's real, right? It's true. Yeah, and I think that's that happened in 2011, and that experience, I think that's why money is in the name of the show, is it's we have got to talk about this stuff, because if you're naive about the way money works in our lives, the power it has over our choices that are available to us, and consequences of, decisions we make that are not about money, but there are financial consequences. You got to be real about it. I can remember when I realized, I have a mentor of mine who was divorced years ago, but she was divorced and she never remarried, and she was married for a certain amount, she was married more than 10 years, so she gets Social Security from her ex-husband. And I was whoa, that's such a clear line that has affected your financial stability now that you're in your mid to late 60s. And as a woman, I didn't know that, And so it's not, I didn't want the show to be a personal finance, show, but acknowledging that it's actually really important to know about your finances. That's real, because otherwise you're gonna get boxed in really scary ways.
So when I teach students about interviewing, I stress pretty hard that they're not going there to talk about themselves. They're there to go and talk to the person that they're talking to. And
I agree with you. I agree with that.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And then I'll say, but sometimes it's okay to talk about yourself if you think you need to, in order to sort of juice the conversation a little bit. And I'll say things like, you know, it's probably not a good idea to talk about politics or religion. I feel like my mom, that's something my mom would say. But little anecdotes about your life that allow you to establish some common ground, that might be a valuable thing. And then there's when you talk to so that's just in a general interview about a general subject that's not as intimate perhaps as these conversations. But then there's the times when we're interviewing people and it's incredibly intimate and they're giving us a lot and all we're doing is soaking it up. And it actually starts to me anyway, it starts to feel a little unfair. Like I get to mine them for this incredibly rich stuff and they don't know a thing about me. And then I get to leave. They don't get paid. I don't know if we should go down that route, actually, but they don't get paid. I'll just say it. I do. And there feels like there's an imbalance. And I have a desire to want to give back to them and share in some way so that the playing field is a little bit on the even side. Not fully even, like I'm talking about myself for half an hour and 45 minutes, and they're talking about, I'm just a little something, but I don't. You don't seem to draw that line, at least not too much. Maybe you do sometimes. Where's your line?
Well, I think you're talking about two different things.
Okay.
I think the experience of pulling someone's story out and then leaving and then editing it and crafting it and putting it out for public consumption, like there is a certain, like, what's the follow-up with the guest, or what's the follow-up with the person whose story you've pulled, you are using as your source material. And in that way, I think that, like, respecting that it's their story and, being be very deliberate about being in touch about what to expect when it comes out and communicating about that, and making, like, Lawrence could not get a CD. He had no internet at Sing Sing, no CD player, and Andy in the WNYC archives made a cassette copy of the podcast, and we mailed it to him, and that felt really good. It felt like that is a way to honor this story that he told us, and we got a copy to his wife. Whether it's like a fair emotional exchange, which is what I think you're talking about. Sometimes I don't feel like people I interview, like, sometimes they don't care. They don't need to know. Like, sometimes I will reference something that happened to me, and they'll be like, let me keep telling my story. I have a sister too, and they don't care. Like, and it's because I think it is, like, it's a powerful experience. Like, I am enjoying sitting on stage and saying my thoughts into a microphone right now. It is, like, very empowering, and I feel heard, and, like, that is a basic human need. And if you're respecting that, that's you're not just taking from them. But, it's case by case in terms of, like, how you feel at the end of the interview. If you need to, like, take a picture together, if you need to walk them to the elevator, tell them to go get ice cream, that sort of thing. Like, it's, I am aware that oftentimes the interviews for Death, Sex, and Money are an emotionally draining experience. So we try to be sensitive to that.
I just lost my train of thought. Okay, and so I've been noticing your presence in the podcast, and that you're more present than I think I would be in things. And then I heard this morning. I hadn't listened to your interview with Dan Savage. Oh. I was driving to Providence to catch the train to come down here, and I heard you say this to him.
And what do you want to know about me?
It was like it was an experiment because we were on tape, and so with Dan Savage, we were like, okay, like, we know he's gonna go there. Like, what are 5 questions we want to make sure we ask at the end of the interview to, like, make sure, like, we just get some interesting stuff. And that was the last of the 5. The others were, like, one was who has died in your life that's left you with regrets, and he talked about his mother. Another was, are you making more money this year than last year? And that, like, led to this whole interesting conversation we wouldn't have gotten to about what he and his husband fight about, which is not sex, but about his husband's online spending habits, which was really funny. And that was like, I mean, Dan Savage, what he does in life is people leave these like very raw, voice messages for him or emails for him, and then he just tells people what he thinks and what he thinks about their lives. And so it seemed like he was a good person to try that out on, and then it led to a really interesting exchange.
Okay, I want to play the rest of it.
Okay.
I swear we're going to get to your questions. It's going to happen.
And what do you want to know about me?
Are you in a committed relationship?
I am.
Are you not monogamous?
No,
Are
we're
you
monogamous, yes.
So what would you do if you found out that he cheated? And what do you think he would do if you found out that you cheated? And cheating is something that will probably happen.
Yeah.
Just put that out there first. The research and the data shows that roughly 50% of men, 50% of women in long-term relationships at some point will cheat, and those 50% of men are not married to those 50% of women. So it will touch almost all committed monogamous relationships. So what's going to be your reaction if and when that happens to you?
I know. I mean, I read you, Dan Savage, and you make me uncomfortable because intellectually, I understand all this. I get desire. I get that it's not rational, and I get that it's a real thing. But I don't know what I would do with the hurt. I have a really difficult time seeing a way outside of it being okay, or seeing a way for it to be okay.
Yeah. My advice would be, if and when it happens, you know what people always say when they talk about the people they love most in their lives, I would take a bullet for this person. I would, walk through fire for this person. That's hurt. You're saying I would hurt for this person in a really profound and life-threatening way. I would take a bullet. I would walk through fire. Infidelity, when people believe in monogamy and monogamy is what they want, infidelity is that bullet.
It's interesting, right?
Really provocative.
Yeah. Well, and I also love how he's like totally teed up. Like, it's a weird question. He laughs, and then he's like, you're going to get cheated on, or you're going to cheat. And then he then he pauses and goes into his quiet place and then says something else, says something profound. Like, I love that. Because I think that's Dan Savage. Like, Dan Savage is so knows what to say, and he's also a deeply feeling person, and that's what makes him such a talent. So why people rely on his advice.
I'm going to play one more piece of tape and get her response to it, and then I want to go to you guys for questions. And Alex, you are microphone man, and so I don't know how you want to do it. Do you want to have people raise their hands, and then you'll come to them and that sort of thing? Okay. So soon. So I heard that this morning. I thought, holy smokes, I got to get this in. So I came and I downloaded, I cut that piece of tape. And I was thinking, and you just said, and we had 5 things that we wanted to do at the end just to see what would happen, just to see what goes. Okay. I wondered if that was the case. And it reminded me of this moment on This American Life recently. So it was This American Life celebrating its 500th episode. And they're playing. I know what you're going to play. You know what I'm going to play? No, you don't.
Yeah, I do.
No, you don't.
I have played it before when I have talked about how to make good radio. It's the Ira interview.
It's the thing about making tape?
Yeah. It's the thing. Yeah. It's incredible.
Okay.
It's perfect.
Yay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, it's really good.
I
have stolen
now.
from this. Let me be clear. I'm going to go back and change that answer. Stolen from this. Yeah. It's really good.
So it's the 500th episode. They're going through and they're talking about some of the favorite things that have happened, over the millennia that the program's been on the air. And then there's this one moment where Julie Snyder's talking to Ira about something that he did as an interviewer. And I'll just play the clip.
Okay, so what else you got?
So there's one, I don't know if it's too weirdly self-referential or sycophantic or something, but there's this really nice moment of you and Tammy Sager that I came across. It's not one that's in my pantheon at all, but just as I was looking back at old stories, I was like, oh, what's this one? And I listened back, and I realized some of the things I like best in the show are when you're just interviewing someone and you get a little off topic and suddenly something really revealing happens. I feel like it happens kind of a lot when you're interviewing people. And I don't know, you say stuff in interviews that I find really surprising. And so anyway, there's this nice moment in, I think it's show 314. It's a show called It's Never Over, and it's the last act, and it's just this interview with Tammy Sager about this joke that she'd thought up like 4 years earlier and never deployed because it was a topical joke about Ralph Nader. And then like this opportunity comes for her to deploy this joke.
Tammy Sager, I should say, is a comedy writer, and she was deploying this joke in a room full of writers at her brand new job.
And she just nails it, like, and everyone thinks it's this, off the cuff, hilarious comment, and not knowing that she'd been saving it up for all this time. And it like gets teed up for her perfectly, and she just like lets it off really casually, and everybody laughs. And then there's a moment right after that. It's like we're sort of like the anecdote has been told. She has the slightly larger thought, like you'd think done. And then it keeps going, and it's good. And that's at, I don't know if you want to play it, but that's at 50:22 of that show.
Right, hold on. And so are you done? Are you in? Is that it? Like, that's it? You used that joke to kind of like get you over the hump, and now is it through?
I felt like I'm more in, yeah. I don't know that I'll ever feel like I'm in with anybody. But no, I have felt like I'm more in. I have felt a marked difference. I mean, do you ever feel like you're totally in with anybody?
Dude, I'm married to somebody who I feel like I'm constantly in a situation of having, I feel like, she doesn't feel this way, but I totally feel like every day I have to prove myself anew.
Really? Well, here's one more thing, though, that is kind of sucky about it, though, is by constantly checking in with what the other person's opinion of you is, you're not just being with that person.
Right.
There's a level of removal there that is sad.
Totally. That's totally my personality. For me, I think that something went wrong when I was a kid where I think that other people, they just accept that they're in. They accept that this other person likes them and they don't have to keep proving themselves. Whereas for me, it's entirely temporal. I'm constantly judging the whole thing moment by moment. Yeah. And it could always fall apart. For me, it never ends.
I remember when I was a kid, and I think I was probably like 4.
So wait, so that thing that I say, that's the thing?
That's the thing.
Yeah. God, I totally did not remember saying that until just now. Yeah, that's so true of me.
It's so personal. And I feel like it's really, I don't know, like I've known you for 10 years now, right? And I heard you say that, I was like, oh, right. That's right. But it did, because I was like, I know there's a lot of times in interviews like where I've just been listening in and you'll like reveal this thing. And I'm always just like, wow, that's
so funny to me. That's just so obvious that you would do that if you have something like that to do, because it's good tape. Like your job is to make good tape. You know what I mean? Like that's our job, is to make good tape. And so like.
I know, but I feel like that's the thing that's different, right? Like you're willing to kind of exploit anything you've got in there. Yeah. And I think for a lot of people, that stuff is just off limits.
I love that.
What do you love about it?
I love, my favorite part, that's how she's like, I've worked with you for 10 years and have never heard you articulate this in our most, personal, intimate, conversations. And there he is trying to pull someone out, and there it is. I think that's really interesting. And also, he's so articulate when he's describing what happens in his world and his inner world. Like, that did not seem off the cuff to me. It's just like amazing, the whole bit about constantly proving himself to his wife, and just like he just perfectly describes this thing, I think, that we don't articulate often.
What stood out to me is his use of the word make.
Oh, yeah.
It's our job to make good tape. And I frequently will say to people, go get good tape, or I hope I get good tape today. Like it's a passive sort of thing. Make suggests something different. And if you talk to photographers don't take pictures. They make pictures. That's a different act. Do you make tape?
Yeah, I don't use those words, but I should, because I think that's what the best interviews have, that element of surprise where you're taking the listener somewhere they didn't expect, and also when both of you are surprised in the moment doing the interview that something has happened together, like that's like magic, you know. And I think that there's some of that you can figure out and plot and strategize beforehand, and you know, like if you can sneak it in where it doesn't feel gimmicky, you know, you have to deploy these very, you know, cautiously and judiciously. But also there are those moments when it just happens because you're both paying attention.
And just again, before we go to the questions, but it feels risky to me. It just feels risky to me. Like I'm not supposed to be an interviewee's friend.
Oh,
I can be friendly,
yeah.
and I don't.
It feels risky to exchange emotional information. Is that what you're saying? Is
Well,
risky?
yes, when I'm interviewing and when I'm not. but in an interview, yeah, because it's not about me.
Yeah, it's messing with the power dynamic, and I think that's like I often like. It's like figuring out how to describe like what my role is in an interview. Like I'm a journalist, and I feel very strongly about that. I have a news background, and I am exploring important topics and important news about our emotional lives. But you know, Albert Maysles, right, who just passed away.
Yes.
Like he talks about the quote in the Times in the obituary from a 1994 piece where it was like, the object of my work is not to make an argument, it's to create life as it is. And I think that is like, I really relate to that. Like I'm not building an argument about whether someone's making good or bad choices in their lives. It's like, let's actually honestly observe what's happening.
Great. Questions from the audience? Where's Alex? Or Rob, for that matter. If you could just state your name and so we can see you, could you stand up too? Do you mind? Am I being a pain?
Yeah. No, it's fine.
Great.
My name is Dan Marin. I am attempting to begin in podcasting, doing interviews about basically hope in the face of reality. Sometimes, I guess. Yeah. One of the things that I'm really struggling with, do you have a two-part question? Is that all right? Okay. One thing that I'm really struggling with is that I'm a very visual thinker. I was brought up a lot more on filmmaking and television, and I've only in recent years discovered how much more intimate the radio storytelling, radio interviewing style can be. And when I found myself having these great interviews, I feel like I'm a pretty confident interviewer, but when it comes to listening and editing back radio, as someone who was brought up with visuals, I'm just looking at waveforms, and I find it really hard to cut and I'm looking around, I don't know what to look at, and I'm just staring at the waveforms on my screen, and I'm wondering what you would suggest about that. And second, I would just say, again, having the interviewing I'm confident on, what do you guys do when it comes to thinking about your structure and your length for the show? I mean, it's not necessarily chronological, and it's not necessarily inverted pyramid like you do in a regular news story. So how do you guys as a team think about structure and length?
Yeah, okay, so the first part, thinking visually when you're making radio, I think that's an advantage in some ways because you're going to be you're trying to create an emotional space for your listeners. So like, I would think about that as an advantage. Like, what does the room look like where your podcast takes place, and just kind of conceptually use that. And then tactically, as you're sort of thinking about sound, I would just walk around and with headphones in, recording, and just paying really close attention to what the physical environment sounds like for a while, just to kind of like just cue yourself up to the ways that you can create space with sound. And in the editing, I love waveforms. I love looking at them. And I am so bad at television when I've done it. We did it for some public television stuff, but like I just like always want to write things that I don't have B-roll for and all that, all that stuff. But I think that depending on what audio software you're using, if you are paying attention to how you're labeling your tracks, you can be like, this is where I'm creating the, like, what this place looked like. This track that says Ambi 1 or Gravel 2 or, sounds of prison guards shouting 3, like, which we did in the Sing Sing interview. Like, it's like, how do you create this, take the listener to where you want to take them? The second question was about, what was the second question? Oh, structure, story structure. I think that's what's really cool about podcasting, because it's blown wide open. Like, if you come up from a public radio reporting background, you learn like 90-second spot, 3-minute, 30-second feature, 8-minute feature, lead for the host, and then lead for you, and then out. It's a very sort of formula that you get. There's having those constraints is good because it makes you be creative. Robert Smith, he was like the genius at like making creative work within those constraints. But when we started piloting Death, Sex, and Money, it was like, holy, like, what is this? And I was listening to a lot of podcasts that were, more than an hour long, and I didn't want to make that. Like, I wanted the show to feel like a little like wrapped up thing that I was giving to my listeners with intention. And so the objective was like 20 to 30 when we first started, and that was just totally made up. It was based on, our use habits, a 3-mile run, subway ride, commute, and then the way we edit the story structure is just like figuring out the tape, and that's, is it going to be an interview podcast where it feels like you just took out the chunks that were boring, but the beginning is the beginning and the end is the end? Or is it going to be something where, there's more tracking? Is it going to be something where Death, Sex, and Money is like kind of a hybrid? And we edit and figure out the structure just by doing group edits where you read your tracking, you play the tape, you read the tracking, you pay attention to when people, you say like, I didn't stop listening at 5:30 because this is totally boring. So then we have to cut that part or move it around. So it's editing. We do a lot of editing to figure out structure.
Who has the mic?
Hi, I'm Kendall Levison. I'm actually an undergraduate at the journalism department here. And there's been a lot of talk recently, especially in the public radio community, started from an article on Transom about public radio voice, and in particular the whiteness of public radio voice. So as people who sort of fall into the category of similar voices are heard a lot on public radio stations like yours, when you're choosing other voices to put, are you conscious of trying to get a diverse cast of voices? Are you more interested in the story and sort of hope the diversity comes from that? Or are you really sort of actively thinking about it?
We're actively thinking about it. I think public radio voice, there's a lot around that. And I, as someone who started in radio with a thicker Southern accent than I have now, it wasn't intentional that I lost it, but I think it just sort of faded as I moved away from West Virginia. But I love the diversity of voices. I love Wade Goodwin. I just love when he shows up. It's like, there he is, something different. And I think racial diversity is a huge problem in public radio, and I think it's a huge problem in public radio native or spin-off podcasting. We have been really intentional about booking guests who are not just white New Yorkers or people who had a similar life trajectory as me. We look at a bunch of things: age, regional diversity, racial diversity, sexuality is really important, gender identity. But race in particular, we sort of said like, we actually like keep track of, the demographics of our guests. And what's been really cool is, when you put together a show that features stories that aren't just white people, not just white people listen, and you can see it in Twitter, and you can see it in who's engaging with the show, and it's very cool. It's like if you make a concerted effort to say these stories are not told, and these stories might not come up first at the pitch meeting, depending on who's in the pitch meeting, if it's not a diverse group of people. you got to work hard on that. And the other thing we do is we at Death, Sex, and Money is a very small team. It's my producer Katie and editor Emily Botine, and we have 2 interns, Zachary Mack and Caitlin Pierce right now, and then we have a part-time engineer. But we will have guest stars at our editorial meetings when we're brainstorming guests, just people from different parts of of WNYC, and just trying to just infuse our ideas with not just what's happening in your life, like just being really intentional about that.
I've been incredibly appreciative of how diverse the people are that you have on the program, and the fact that you aren't pointing at it.
Yeah.
Yep, it's just.
Well, it's America. Get used to it. It's not going to get any less diverse anytime soon. I was talking to somebody about Broad City recently, and like the way, I think I learned a lot from their first season and how they dealt with race. Like it was just like, this is based in New York City. We're going to have diverse people, and we're not going to talk about it. You know, we're just going to that's just is. And like, why isn't that model just deployed more often?
Hi, my name is Laura Calzada. I'm interning in the most diverse, the best podcast nowadays, Latino USA on NPR.
Yes. Yes.
Todos los productores. And there is the engineer. Okay, so yes, and I'm very happy interning here. Thank you, guys. My question is, when is your birthday, and what do you want to be when you were 10 years old, and why?
Oh, let's see. My birthday's September 1st, 1980. I'm a Virgo. You could tell. What did I want to be when I was 10? Let's see. When I was 10, I played violin. I rode horses. I think I wanted to be at that point Shel Silverstein, because if you're okay, well, he was a poet. He's like a poet. He wrote like kids poetry that was like really deep, and he drew. But his bio, when you would look at the back of the page, it was like Shel Silverstein is a animator, cartoonist, so and so, so and so, and so and so. He lives in somewhere in the Southwest. He's since passed away, but it was like, oh, you can be all of these things, you know. And so I think that was, you know. Plus, he was really. I loved his stuff. I think by the time I was a little older, like maybe junior high, I got more into like writing, and Ellen Goodman was my hero. She was a columnist for the Boston Globe who won the Pulitzer Prize. And what stuck out for me about her was she was sort of one of the first, like, I'm going to talk about the things that are happening in my family's life and the families that I know, and I'm going to make it important on the op-ed page. And it's been neat to think about that as something that like is an influence that I still sort of feel like I'm drawing on.
Hello, my name's Rhiannon, and I was wondering, do you think of Death, Sex, and Money as a gendered show, and is that a label that you shy away from or are thinking about, like in the way that you approach?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because when we were, I have totally 100% benefited from the fact that I'm a woman in this moment in media making, because there's a dearth of women hosts, and I think like there's an interest in supporting women hosted and women produced podcasts. So thank you for this moment. And I think I'm really proud to be a woman host of a podcast. That said, when we were thinking about the show, I didn't want it to feel like this is the place where women can come and talk about things, because I think that all of that's really important, but I also think there's like profound shifts happening in American masculinity and what it is to be a man, and am I supposed to be the primary earner or what? And if I'm not, like what does this mean? Like, and you know, family structures are changing. Like, I just think that like all of that is too interesting to like leave off the table. So it was intentionally like, I want this to be a show that respects and honors and thinks women's stories are important, but also explored other things. I think our audience is more women than men, but it's not hugely so, and I'm proud of that.
Hi, I'm Ben.
Hi.
I am a production sound mixer, and I like radio, so it's really great. My question is about, could you talk about empathy, like crossing the empathy barrier, like when you ask someone a question, and then you think, ooh, maybe I shouldn't have asked that. Do you ever have that, or maybe not?
I don't have that.
Okay.
I don't. I have like it's more like it's like you can tell when you're pushing someone beyond where they're comfortable. I should say I don't have like, oh, I'm making them feel something. That's bad. It's more like if they're like, I don't know if I want to go here. Like then I don't go like, come on, like, come on, you know the show's name. Like I don't do that. But for me, the thing I thought about more is, and this comes from political, this is also something I thought about a lot with covering politics, is my impulse is to be like, well, tell me your truth and tell me how you feel. And I can remember moments being in South Carolina talking to Republican voters who were like, and clearly we can't trust President Obama because he's a Muslim who wasn't born in this country. Then I would like pull that out and then I would say, he's not Muslim, and he was born in the U.S. and like correct, but it's like that line of like, when you're trying to get tape, you want to pull out, and like you get that when you nod and agree and are really not combative, but you can't do that, as a journalist, or that's the ultimate in like not being an honest reporter. In like I'm gonna get really tape, and I'm gonna make you think I'm on your side, and I'm gonna screw you when I go back and cut it. Like that's not honorable, so yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, but I think like, making someone sort of, I like my moments I like the best in interviews are when, because of the conversation, the way it's gone, like you're both like, the person is articulating something that hasn't occurred to them before in words. And I think that comes from sort of, just asking follow-up questions and pursuing, and that's not always comfortable. So it's that's the feel.
Hi, I'm Jeff Taylor. I'm a musician producing a podcast where I interview really successful musicians, and I try to feel better about it. Thanks. I would like to say that I think Mark Maron, who I understand to be a straight man, did a really great job and a non-creepy job talking to Cameron Esposito about her sex life.
I didn't hear that episode.
It's really great.
Okay, I gotta listen
would check
to
it out.
Okay.
I'm gonna read this because I don't want to fuck. Okay. Could you let us in a little more about that critical period when the political reporting was tapering off and you wanted to play around? You had a clean slate for yourself. What was it like as you tried to zero in on the concept? Because I'm going through that too. I've conducted interviews. I'm starting to dive into this endless mass of tape. I know what it's about, but I don't really fully know what it's about. How did you not lose your grip on those ideas that started to solidify? How did it become Death, Sex, and Money, not just you making cool interviews? Yeah,
that's a really good question, because that was the most scary. That was a very scary time. And a few things to point out. So I have worked for WNYC throughout. The Death, Sex, and Money concept came from a contest that was internal, where they said, everyone in the building, we're looking for new content, pitch us your ideas, here are the things that we want you to include in this treatment of your pitch. So it was, what is your show? Why your show? Who would host your show? Who is your audience? What is your audience's media diet? Like, where does it fit in? Like, what is the argument for this show? And I would not have decided to start a podcast if someone hadn't said, Anna, here's your homework to say what your dream job is, because it's just like you're too busy doing your job, but then when that moment comes, it's like, oh, okay, I can write 6 pages for my dream job on a weekend. So I had that treatment, which was basically like Death, Sex, and Money, conversations about like
how we live now and what's really happening, and maybe it's feature stories and interviews, and maybe it's an hour radio show, and maybe it's, you know, it was more like these topics sort of, and this is the feel. And so then when I started piloting, we just started, like, I think you're doing the right thing, which is just like, just start recording. Yeah. And just like say it, I don't know what I'm doing. Let's just try this. I'm piloting, like, don't say I don't know what I'm doing, but say I'm piloting. This is the idea that I have for the show. Let's have this conversation. I'll let you know what I'm gonna do with this tape. And so through that, we did some interviews that just discarded because nothing quite happened with the tape. And then, but there was like one we did early on with a woman named Heidi Reinberg, who was getting Christ out of her apartment in Brooklyn after living in New York City for 30 years. And she'd been a freelancer, and she had this sweet deal on her apartment, and then the landlord called and said, I'm selling, you've got to get out. And it was like the last straw of her New York life. And she was 53 and single and kind of questioning all of her life choices up to that point. So it was good, interesting content. And out of that conversation, I cut together like 2.5 minutes, and it took a long time polishing it, and but I had something to play for people when they were like, what are you doing all, by yourself in that corner, and we're paying your salary. I think that was definitely like, we did that interview in maybe early December, and that was definitely like, that was before the end of the year, because we played a bit on the Brian Lehrer show. So it was like a couple weeks, you sort of do the interview and you're like, this is the moment. And then through that, then it was like, I could say, this is the feel, like this is what we're doing. And that gave me some time to keep experimenting, because they didn't think I was wasting their time while they paid me while I was piloting. And then the other thing that was a really pivotal moment was when Bill Withers agreed to be interviewed by me. I'm from West Virginia. I had this like weird connection through the West Virginia Music Hall of Fame to get his wife's email, and I was like, please, this is what I'm trying to do. Can I please? And like nothing. And then one day his wife responded and said, Mr. Withers would like to do this interview. And I was like, thank you. Because then it was great. The interview was great. And then that became, I knew I was going to be one of the first episodes. And then at the same time, the story with Alan Simpson and his wife and my love life, like I was sort of working on all this at once and like collecting the tape, but it became this idea. I was like, okay, if this is part of the show, and if this is part of the show, and this is part of the show, like this is maybe what the show is. And then I worked with a sound designer named John Delore, who was working like 2 cubicle rows over from me for Studio 360, and I had this tape, and I was like, hey John, like I want a theme song, and I'm thinking like road music that's kind of groovy and like anything that you can. And he's like, I've got a song. And I was like, cool, let me hear it. And so he had this song that he'd recorded with a bandmate years before, and then like we worked together, and he designed the top of the show. And then it was like, okay, if it has this like kind of like basing, like that kind of gave it a groove. And then you start piecing in like the movie clips. That was his idea. But it's just building those pieces and playing it for a lot of people, which is scary. I can remember PJ Vogt was still working at WNYC when I was piloting, and I had this like top. I couldn't figure out the top of the show, and I had 2 versions of the Bill Withers thing, and I was like, they tell me that I need to like explain the show more and say like death, sex, money is this, and then there was another one where I like didn't explain it at all, and there was like the middle ground, and then I played them all for PJ, and he's like, do the one you don't explain, that. They'll get it, I was like, that was just really good advice. It's like, they'll come along with you. You don't have to like, and this is about, in the next hour, I'm going to do this. Like, podcasting is not that. It's like, just kind of going in,
I just wanted to check in with you. We were scheduled to end at 8, but there are many questions, and
why don't we take
happy
a few
to
more
be
questions?
here. Are you cool?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Hi, I'm Lily. I go to graduate school at the CUNY journalism, and I'm just getting into radio. You've talked about this a lot, kind of how you add yourself into the radio show. I'm glad you brought up like the Senator, Alan Simpson, and everything. But like the episode that we listened to about cheating, at the end you like bring Arthur back into it and like discuss with him how you've obviously been listening to all these people talk about cheating for months, and you come home and you're like, guess what? And he's like,
let's talk about this again.
Yeah, he's like, so 3 of those conversations were great, and the other 47 like are exhausting. So like, how do you decide like when to bring yourself back in? And like, that's like a clip that you recorded with him and then added at the end of the cheating episode. Like, can you talk a little bit about advice?
Yeah, that was, that was really, really happening. Like, everyone who worked on Death, Sex, and Money has been traumatized for the last month. With all of it, like, oh my God, having dreams. So I wanted to, like, sort of acknowledge that this is, like, if you're feeling uncomfortable as a listener, like, it's not just you. Like, this churns up things. And then the other thing was, like, it's like there were some really sad stories in that episode. And so how to end where someone's not just like, ugh, like God. And so I wanted something like a little funny. And Arthur like had said, he basically, like, his mantra had become like, Anna, our life cannot be death, sex, and money. We must have like moments when we can just watch Netflix. And so I just recorded him one morning on my iPhone, like, so how's this been for you, and captured that moment. So that was where that came from, was just to kind of like, just say like, we all just got through this together, and like, but it's also kind of funny how disturbing it is,
Hey.
Hi.
I'm in a shadow, aren't I?
You are.
Yeah. I'm Grant. One thing I really enjoy about the show is how often you don't explain things that I would expect to have way more explanation. Like, there was a guest in an earlier episode who was talking about the New York performance art scene in the like 70s or 80s. And then when you had Margaret Cho on, there was a lot of like conversations about alternative sex practices that like you didn't stop to explain. And I'm wondering like what feedback you've gotten from that, and because I know that's breaking a lot of journalistic rules to not be inclusive, but I really appreciate that it, like, for me, it feels like you're trusting the audience that if there's something we don't know, we can all Google it, but I feel like there would probably be pushback.
Yeah, I think that is, thank you. We actually like talked in the Margaret Cho episode, like, do we need to say BDSM is blah, 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 blah? And we were like, nah, people can figure it out. Context clues, but I think I think that's a very key difference in broadcasting and podcasting, which is like, again, it's that presumption of like, are you going out to the masses and need to make sure there's a common denominator, or can you make some assumptions about the people who are listening to your show? And one of the assumptions we make is if you're listening to the show, you found it on the internet, whether through iTunes or, on your phone or on the internet, through a website. So if you can make that assumption, there's a lot that you don't have to explain, because people can just go, when did Harvey Milk die? That was another reference in the Margaret Cho thing. So that's like, and that's also, we episodes will vary in how much tracking there is, but tracking we try to keep to a minimum if possible. If it works with the flow of the conversation, because you want that feeling of listening in on a conversation. And if you pull out to say like, Harvey Milk died, in this time, this Margaret Cho was X years old, at this time, because she was born in X year, that kind of pulls you out of that feeling.
I just explained what ISDN is, like a little bit.
I appreciated that, because that's actually, that was appropriate, because people here are not all, radio professionals, and that was an inclusive footnote. I appreciated that.
Yeah, okay.
You don't want people Googling while we're up here. That would be rude.
Yeah. I do think it's hard, though, to figure out what does my audience know, what does my audience not know.
Yeah, that's very, because you don't know who your audience is. Like, there's surveys in podcasting, you sort of know, But who knows, like that's what's so cool about getting these stories from listeners. Like Ernie, who's in the Living Alone episode, lives in Vallejo, California in a trailer, and he listens while he's on his like union shift at the refinery, like doing the safety checks. So he's alone in a room all night and he listens to podcasts, like that's not who you picture when you picture like hip podcast listeners, I love that. Got my phone, got my podcast. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Camilo Vargas. I'm a junior producer for Latino USA, and I also have a podcast idea about being a gay person of color in the United States. So I wanted to get your insight on not just having diversity, but talking about race, addressing race, and especially being able to get people to open up about the prejudices that they may have, even though they think it's not racism or they might think of it as something different. How do you get people to open up? Or how would you get people to open up about that?
I think there's so much to do about race and sex. This very dangerous territory. But one of my favorite moments in the show is I was talking to this retired NFL player named Dominique Foxworth. And this was not me at all. This was just his willingness to go there. I don't know, do you have the tape?
I have the opening from that show.
I can describe it. It's
Dope.
amazing. Yeah. Listen to the episode because it's all him. Like I was like, so what was it like being a college football player? Because I was interested in this experience of being an 18-year-old who's all of a sudden this celebrity.
Oh no, I have that. I'm sorry. I'm going to interrupt you because you provided me with it.
Yeah.
And it's right here.
Oh, good.
Is this
really
about
good.
is it about sex?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Sorry. Here we go.
What was it like to be a celebrity on campus with women?
There were some easy opportunities or layups as I called them back then, and those easy opportunities
layups.
Yeah, I was 18-year-old guy. I mean, forgive me. Are we gonna get a chance to get into conversations about the more mature Dominic
Yes,
Foxworth
absolutely
that has a better perception on masculinity than racking up numbers and that's how I thought when I was 18. Forgive me. So when those opportunities presented themselves, there was a specific type of person who was looking for you. And those are not the type of people that you're necessarily looking for a long-term relationship, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
it's
I think
an extension of fandom, in some, I guess.
So having fun and having these great sex stories from being a college athlete, but like attracting the type of woman, like attracting my wife, we went to the same school, but we didn't date then because she was not enamored with the persona that I was, and so I think it hurt us academically, where professors were harder on us because they thought we were dummies who were just there to play football, and it definitely was difficult romantically, and I think it probably had a racial component also. And going to predominantly white school, it's like, well, these women who wouldn't necessarily be interested in you as kind of a long-term relationship type of person, they're like, well, this big kind of like mandingo strong black man, let's experiment with that and see what this is all about. Which obviously
were you
we
aware
didn't.
of that at the time, or looking back?
I think I was aware of it at the time, or I think I used it to justify some of the things that I would do, So I wasn't like the best boyfriend or the best everything at the time, and I think I would use things like that, like, well, they're just after me because they just want to be close to the football guy, or they just think that I'm in great shape and I'm like this stereotypical like oversexed black male, and they want to give that a try, but they don't actually want to take me seriously. So, I mean, whatever. I don't care if like I am with her and her friend and don't think much about it, So I think I was aware of it to the extent that it gave me cover,
That is so honest and like, what? Like that. Like that he's like thinking that these women are coming, white women are coming with a certain idea, and like they're treating him and dehumanizing him in a way, and so he feels like he can dehumanize them, and like that all that's happening on a college campus and none of it is spoken, and college football is as huge as it is in the United States of America, and no one has said that out loud. You know, like, I thought that was like, whoa. But that's, there's a lot more to do. So your podcast is a good idea. Yeah.
All right, well, why don't we take 2 more questions?
Okay.
Hi, I'm Camila Kerwin. This is kind of a simple question, but being that many of the people on your show are not big, famous people in America, can you just talk to me a little bit about your story finding process, how you find these people?
Sure. It's some of it is we know we want to do something about somebody who's like really intimately like engaging with death on a daily basis, and like kind of thinking about that led to us discovering Caleb Wild, who's this funeral director who's got a very active kind of Twitter presence, and so we knew about him that way. Sometimes it's like somebody writes a personal essay, and it was in this Glamour magazine. Marissa Carroll is married to Liam Lowry, who had transitioned, and she'd written about what it was to fall in love with her now husband as he was going through a gender transition. But it was like her, point of view, first person essay, and I was like, what was that like between the two of them? So I got in touch and got them together, and we did an episode about that.
But you use the program to do that. Like you forward announce what the next.
Oh yeah.
You promo what the next show is going to be about, or 2 shows down the road.
So we know.
And you say, hey.
Yeah, by the time we're promoting an episode, we know it's going to be an episode. Usually, we haven't had to kill one yet. Sorry guys, that one didn't work out. And then the listener, I think we'll keep doing more and more listener-driven stories. Like the money and love story, it was just like such a basic ask, which was like, how have you navigated this in your relationships? And we got these incredible stories, and with people at different life phases, and different questions, and kids, and joint checking account, and different income levels, and all that stuff. And I think, and those have proven to be more popular than like a lot of the celebrity episodes. So I think people are responding to hearing just people telling stories about how they deal with cheating, how they deal with money. So we'll probably do more of those listener-driven segments. But it's a mix, and then it's like, the celebrity interviews. It's just kind of like it's just who do we think would be, who we're curious about, and then it's a combination of like who can you book, and then we try not to do like people who are doing the book tour thing. Because you just get that, that it's they just did the other shows talking about the same thing. So I really like finding someone who, finding someone who's like kind of like way back, but like, and you go, oh, like what's she been doing? Like I love her. I forgot I love her, and that's been really cool. I don't know if all of you will know the band, but there's a band called Luscious Jackson that was big when I was like junior high school, like loved them. It's like a women's like these 3 ladies who, it was kind of hip hop infused. They were sort of friends with the Beastie Boys, like dance music. Naked Eye. Do you know that song? Yeah, naked eyes on the forest. Look it up. Google it later. But they kind of went, sort of disappeared. They just reunited last year and put out an album. And they're going to be the house band for our live event at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. And so we've gotten and we booked some cool people, but like all caps emails coming in, Luscious Jackson! It's like hitting this like, oh my God, so that's cool. I think and also for them to see, they're sort of, like they're moms in Brooklyn now, and then to see that you're gathering people who like are super fans of theirs, that's like cool.
Last one.
Sorry,
All right.
I'm telling long stories.
Nice singing, by the way.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Jen, and I actually maybe was the first voice in your Living Alone special about, I sat around in my tank top and underwear, and then when I got cold, I put socks on. So anyway, thank you for including my little
God,
story.
Thank you for your ability to talk like so vividly. Yeah, I love
Cool.
that.
The question I had for you is, as a listener, I frequently cry at these stories that are maybe engineered to bring that emotion, but nonetheless, you guys are the ones that are compiling all of that sound. And so how do you keep it together? How do you reconcile it at the end of your day? And how do you take what you have felt and bring it forward into your craft?
That's a good question. Yeah, Jen said, she's like, at the very beginning of Living Alone episode, it's like, how did you say it? It's like, I run around, because I live alone, I run around in underwear and tank top.
Yeah,
and
it was when I first moved into my own apartment, I was like,
I don't have to wear pants. Yeah. Yeah, I loved it. So it's like, that's a way that there's sometimes where it's like, wow, how do therapists deal with this? Like, because there's a lot, like, ugh, because you're encountering, like, I think the thing that I've learned about life through Death, Sex, and Money in the few months we've been doing it, is that you're not going to get to that place where things are settled, you know? You'll hit a moment where you're feeling really grateful and things feel like, yeah, relationship, yes, apartment, yes, job, yes, now my parents are sick, you know, and so it's like realize, and then like, this person I love died, or now my job is falling through, and all these things that I thought I had like lined up, and that is like to reckon with that every day is like also is very emotional and scary, and it's also very healthy in that Buddhist way of like makes you grateful for the things that are in place in that moment. The episode that I felt the most like I was like sick to my stomach and like was Lawrence was being at Sing Sing, and that was partially I think an experience anyone would have being in a prison where you come through those locked doors and patted down, and but the thing that I kept thinking about was like we're ending the interview and he he's like, you all get safely back to the city, just drive safe. He was so like aware, and then he was like, and just best of luck in your career, and it just had this really long view because he knew I was like going back to this life where things changed and where things would continue outside of the walls, and it just hit like I just had this really intense emotional exchange with this man, and he's going to just be sitting here, and that's what prison is. That's why it's punishment. So yeah, that was like come home, like, watch Netflix that night, like, decompress. Yeah, because it's like, I want Death, Sex, and Money to be a show where you're gonna like feel things and you're gonna feel a little challenged, but not so much that it's like the thing that you avoid because it's like the friend who's gonna always make you like encounter the hard truths that you're in denial about. You want it to be kind of like, but it's fun to encounter the hard truths together. So that's what I hope. It's like that you're really like it's. I think it's about really important things, but I want it to also feel like something that you enjoy coming to.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rob.
Yes, thank
Sound
you.
guy. That's great.
Thank you.
No.